Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Mr. Vanderpool. Today we're going to be talking about the foreign exchange market. And hopefully, some of you guys have been to other countries and have bought stuff in other countries. And if you have probably had the experience of having to exchange your dollars for the foreign currency of the country that you are in. The market in which that exchange happens is called the foreign exchange market. It's also called the Forex market. And today we are going to be talking about that market. Alright, let's talk about the foreign exchange market, also known as the Forex. This is the market where you have the buying and selling of currency. So for example, in order to purchase souvenirs in France, it is first necessary for Americans to sell their dollars, thus increasing the supply of the dollar in the Forex, and buy euros, thus increasing the demand for euros in the foreign exchange market. Any transaction that occurs in the balance of payments will necessitate this foreign exchange. The exchange rate is determined in the foreign currency market. So this exchange rate is going to be represented by the variable E there. So for example, the current exchange rate is approximately 8 won to $1. And the won is the currency of China. So simply put, the exchange rate is the price of a currency. So if the exchange rate is 8 won to $1, that means that it takes 8 won to buy $1. Alright, let's talk about some of the what happens when we have changes in exchange rates. So exchange rates, once again represented by the variable E, are a function of the supply and the demand for currency. An increase in the supply of a currency will decrease the exchange rate of a currency, and when the exchange rate of a currency decreases, that is called depreciation. The currency is becoming less valuable. A decrease in supply of a currency will increase the exchange rate of a currency. That is called appreciation. The currency is appreciating, and the currency is becoming more valuable. An increase in demand for a currency will increase the exchange rate of a currency, and a decrease in demand for a currency will decrease the exchange rate of a currency. Alright, so let's talk about appreciation and depreciation. We've already kind of talked about this. So appreciation of a currency occurs when the exchange rate of that currency increases. The exchange rate is going up. Depreciation of a currency occurs when the exchange rate of the currency decreases. The exchange rate is going down. So for example, if German tourists flock to America to go shopping, then in order to buy the goods in America, they will go ahead and supply euros in the foreign exchange market. So they're supplying euros in order to buy dollars. Okay, so they're supplying the euros, and the demand for dollars will increase. Okay, they are demanding dollars in the foreign exchange market because they need those dollars to be able to buy the American goods. And ultimately, this will cause the euro to depreciate and the dollar to appreciate. So generally what's going to be happening is we're going to be comparing two currencies. One currency is going to appreciate. Generally the currency that is demanded is going to appreciate because the demand's going up for it. The other is going to depreciate because you're supplying one currency to buy the other. The one that is supplied is going to depreciate. Now there's a couple of ways we can actually graph this foreign exchange market. There's the two-graph method, there's the one-graph method. We're going to go ahead and start here with the two-graph method. We have a little example. So we're going to have two countries. We have the United States of America to the left, and we have France to the right. So let's say there's an increase in interest rates in the U.S. relative to France. So if you lived in France, where would you like to invest your hard-earned money? In the United States, because you can get higher interest on your money. So how do you do it? You go through the exchange market. So what's going to happen is France is going to go ahead and supply their euros in order to buy dollars. So let's go ahead and take a look at a graph of the supply and demand for euros. So it's a simple supply and demand graph. We've got price on our y-axis, we've got quantity on our x-axis, and we're looking at the euro here. We've got an upward sloping supply curve, downward sloping demand curve where they intersect. You have an equilibrium price for the euro and quantity for the euro. So now what's going to happen is the French are supplying their euros. So there's an increase in the supply of the euro. So the supply curve shifts to the right from S to S1. Now we have a new equilibrium where S1 meets D. And you can see we have a new price level P1 and a new quantity of euros Q1. So you can see here that the price of the euro went down. Thus, you had a depreciation in the euro. So the French are supplying the euros in order to buy dollars. So now let's take a look at what's going on to the supply and demand for the dollar in this exchange market. So once again, we're going to have simple supply and demand graphs here. In this case, we're focusing in on the dollar. So we have our price on our y-axis, quantity on our x-axis. We're looking at the dollar. We have a downward sloping demand curve, upward sloping supply curve. We have an equilibrium price and quantity. So now we are buying dollars. So the demand curve shifts to the right from D to D1. We have a new equilibrium quantity of dollars, Q1, new equilibrium price, P1. So you can see that the price of the dollar went up. Thus, we have an appreciation in the dollar. So the euro depreciated, the dollar appreciated. Okay, and these dollars are going to be used to invest in the United States of America. And the French receive higher interest rates. So always think of this exchange market as a market where one currency is being exchanged for another. So people are taking their currency into this exchange market. They're supplying it in order to demand another currency. All right, so this is the two-graph version of the exchange market. Now we're going to go ahead and look at the one-graph version. All right, ladies and gents, so in this one-graph version, we're going to be focusing in on one currency and seeing what happens to the exchange rate of this one currency. So we're going to focus in and we're going to look at what would happen if we had an increase in the supply of US dollars relative to the euro. So our focus here is going to be on the dollar. Whatever currency we are focused on is going to be what's closest to the y-axis. So we're looking at the y-axis here. So we see here it says the dollar, as we go left to right here. We read this, the dollar, and the slash mark is relative to, okay, that slash mark reads relative to the euro. Okay, so on our y-axis, because we're focusing in on the dollar is closest to the y-axis, so we have the dollar relative to the euro on the y-axis. Then our x-axis, we have the quantity of dollars. So now, let's go ahead and take a look at our market here. So we're going to have a downward sloping demand for dollars. We're going to have an upward sloping supply for dollars. And where those intersect, we're going to have an equilibrium exchange rate called E and an equilibrium quantity of dollars called Q. So now we're going to go ahead and take a look at what happens if we increase the supply of US dollars. So the supply of US dollars are going to shift to the right from supply of dollar to supply of $1. And as you can see, we have a new equilibrium where supply of $1 meets the demand for the dollar. And we can see here that we have a new exchange rate, E1, a new quantity of dollars, Q1. So as we read the bottom here, the supply of the dollar shifted to the right, which implied that the exchange rate, as we can see, went down. And the quantity of the dollar went up. Because the exchange rate went down, the dollar depreciated relative to the euro. The dollar lost value. Now we're going to look at what happens if we have a decrease in the supply of the yen relative to the euro. Once again, we're focusing in here on the yen. So on our y-axis, what's closest to the currency that we're focusing on is going to be closest to the y-axis. So we have the yen relative to the euro. So remember that slash mark is relative to. So we have the yen relative to the euro on our y-axis. On our x-axis, we have the quantity of yen. So we're focusing on the yen here. So we have a downward sloping demand for yen, upward sloping supply of yen. That creates an equilibrium exchange rate, quantity of the yen. Now we're going to decrease the supply, shifting the supply of the yen to the left from S yen to S yen 1. And as you can see, where S yen 1 meets the demand for yen, we have a new exchange rate, E1, and a new quantity of yen, Q1. So the supply of yen shifted to the left, which implies that the exchange rate went up from E to E1, and the quantity of yen went down from Q to Q1. So the yen appreciated relative to the euro. The yen became more valuable. All right, now we're going to take a look at another scenario here, an increase in demand for the British pound relative to the US dollar. So once again, our y-axis, we have the pound relative to the dollar. Remember, we have the pound closest to the y-axis relative to the dollar. We have quantity of pounds on our x-axis. We have a downward sloping demand for the pound. We have an upward sloping supply for the pound. Where those intersect, we have an equilibrium exchange rate and quantity of the pound. Now we're going to increase demand for the pound from D pound to D pound 1. Where D pound 1 meets supply pound, you can see that we have a new exchange rate, E1, and a new quantity of pounds in Q1. So what happened here, as we read the bottom, the demand for the pound shifted to the right, which implied that the exchange rate went up and the quantity of the pound went up. So the pound appreciated relative to the dollar. All right, now let's take a look at a decrease in demand for the yen relative to the British pound. So here we're going to look at the yen relative to the pound. So we're focusing on the yen. So on our y-axis, we have yen relative to pound. On our x-axis, we have the quantity of the yen. And once again, the focus is on the yen. So we have the supply of yen, we have the demand for yen. Where those intersect, we have an equilibrium exchange rate and quantity of yen. We're going to decrease demand, shifting to the left from D yen to D yen 1. You can see that it created a new exchange rate, E1, a new quantity of yen. So the demand for the yen shifted to the left, which implies that the exchange rate went down, the quantity of yen went down, which implied that the yen depreciated relative to the pound. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and end this video here, and we'll move on to our next video.